The moment he laughed and said, "Come on, Mama, show me what you got," she closed her eyes, whispered her daughter's name, and when she opened them again, the entire gym was about to learn why they used to call her the Angel of Death. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button for more. Also, share your thoughts, and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, so don't miss out. Now, let's continue. But that reckoning was still 37 minutes away. Amara Washington stood in the parking lot of Titan Martial Arts Academy, her Honda Civic's engine ticking in the afternoon heat. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched bodies moving with lethal precision. Spinning kicks, devastating combinations, the kind of controlled violence that used to be her native language. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "You sure about this? It's only been 8 months since the accident. Since the funeral. Since she'd buried her 7-year-old daughter, and every reason she'd ever had for being strong." Amara's fingers traced the gym membership card Dr. Rodriguez had practically forced into her hands. "Grief counseling only goes so far, Amara. Your body needs to remember what it felt like to be powerful. You were a fighter once, weren't you?" Once. The word felt like swallowing glass. She'd been the Angel of Death in the underground circuit, undefeated in 41 brutal fights, the woman who moved like smoke and struck like divine retribution. The fighter who'd earned enough money to buy a house, create a life, give her baby girl everything she'd never had growing up in foster care. That woman felt like a ghost now. The gym's air conditioning hit her like a wall as she pushed through the glass doors. Immediately, the scent transported her back, sweat, determination, and that metallic taste of adrenaline that preceded violence. A few people glanced her way, 2 women practicing kickboxing, an older man working the heavy bag, teenagers learning basic grappling. And then she saw him. Xavier Thompson commanded the center training area like he'd been born to rule it. 6'5" with the kind of lean muscle that spoke of obsessive dedication, his movements were liquid poetry punctuated by explosive power. The group of students watching him looked hypnotized as he demonstrated a combination that would have hospitalized most people. "Devastating, isn't it?" he called out, not a trace of humility in his voice. 5 years of dedication, people. This is what mastery looks like when you're willing to sacrifice everything for perfection. Amara watched him work, recognizing the type immediately. She'd fought dozens of Xavier Thompsons over the years, technically brilliant fighters whose greatest weakness was their need to be worshipped. Still, she had to admit his form was flawless. Clean. Brutal. Probably unbeatable against anyone who fought by conventional rules. "What would you think of him, baby girl? Think Mommy could take him?" The familiar knife twisted in her chest, but for the first time in months, it felt different. Less like drowning, more like remembering how to breathe underwater. "First time here." The voice belonged to a young woman with kind eyes and the callous knuckles of someone who knew real violence. "Yeah," Amara managed, her voice smaller than intended. "I called yesterday. Amara Washington." "Perfect. I'm Lisa, Master Chen's assistant. He's in a meeting, but Xavier can show you around. He's our head instructor and current regional champion." She gestured toward the man who was now basking in the admiration of his students like a cat in sunlight. Xavier dismissed his class with a casual wave and approached, his smile practiced and predatory. His eyes catalogued Amara immediately, soft around the edges, no visible muscle definition, clearly intimidated by her surroundings. Well. Fresh blood. His grin was sharp enough to cut glass. Xavier Thompson, head instructor and undefeated regional champion. He extended a hand, letting it linger just a moment too long. "And you are?" "Amara." She pulled her hand back, noting how his grip had been calibrated to establish dominance without being obvious about it. "Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. What brings you to our little temple of pain? Self-defense? Fitness? A lot of moms find martial arts help them feel more empowered." Moms. The word hit like a sucker punch, but Amara kept her expression neutral. "I used to train," she said quietly. Xavier's eyebrows lifted with barely concealed amusement. "Oh really? What style? Yoga? Pilates? Mixed martial arts? Underground circuit?" "Aha. His tone shifted to the verbal equivalent of patting a child's head. Those fitness classes can be pretty intense. Well, we do things a little differently here. This is actual combat training. But don't worry, we'll ease you into it. Amara felt something cold and familiar settle in her stomach. She'd heard that tone before, from men who thought they knew everything about her based on what they could see. Men who learned too late that assumptions could be lethal. "Let me show you around," Xavier continued, gesturing toward the equipment area. "This is our competition grade gear, probably a bit advanced for you right now, but good to know it's here. These bags hit back pretty hard, so you'll want to start with the lighter ones. Oh, and definitely invest in quality protective gear. Safety first, especially for beginners." As they walked, his commentary flowed in an unbroken stream of condescension. "This is where our professional fighters train, not really your speed yet, but aspirational, right? These gloves are regulation weight, so they might feel heavy at first. That's our competition ring over there. Don't worry, you won't be going in there for a long time." Amara tried on the protective headgear he handed her, and suddenly her body remembered everything. The weight, the restriction of vision, the way her hands naturally formed weapons when she was armed for war. Her stance shifted. Almost imperceptibly. "Feels natural, doesn't it?" Xavier chuckled. "That's good equipment for you. Even complete novices feel comfortable pretty quickly." The comment stung more than it should have. Amara set the headgear down carefully, her jaw tightening by degrees. "Cite1, have you ever been completely underestimated because of being a parent? Share a time when someone assumed you were just a mom, and had no idea what you were really capable of. Your stories matter, drop them in the comments." Across the gym, Master Chun emerged from his office, a weathered man in his 60s whose presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. Students bowed respectfully as he passed, and even Xavier straightened his posture. "Ah, our new student," Master Chun approached with a smile that actually reached his eyes. "Welcome to Titan Academy. I am Master Chun. Amara Washington. Thank you for having me." Master Chen's gaze was sharp, cataloging details Xavier had missed. The way Amara's weight was distributed on the balls of her feet, the unconscious protective positioning of her hands, the faint scars on her knuckles that spoke of countless hours destroying heavy bags and human bodies. "Xavier has been showing you around." "Yes, sir. Just explaining how we should probably start Amara off with our beginner program," Xavier replied, his voice carrying that same patronizing edge. "She mentioned she used to do some fitness training, so I thought the basics might be perfect for getting back into it." "What did you train?" Master Chun asked gently, his question directed at Amara. "Mixed martial arts. Boxing. Muay Thai. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu." She paused, then added quietly, "I fought professionally." "Local tournaments?" Xavier asked with a knowing smirk. Amara's hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. "Underground circuit. Professional bouts. I was ranked number 3 in my weight class before I retired." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Xavier's smirk faltered slightly, but his skepticism remained obvious. "That's interesting," he said slowly. "A lot of people claim they were pros. The sport's really evolved though. What we're doing now is probably light years ahead of whatever you experienced back in the day." Master Chen's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. In 30 years of teaching, he'd learned to read both technique and character. Xavier Thompson was undeniably skilled, but his need to diminish others revealed a weakness that no amount of training could overcome. Amara, however, carried herself with the stillness that only came from real violence. The way she breathed, the way her eyes tracked movement, the unconscious calculation of distance and angles, these weren't things that could be faked or forgotten. "Perhaps," Master Chun said carefully, "you would both benefit from some light sparring. Nothing serious. Just an opportunity for Amara to shake off the rust." Xavier's eyes lit up with barely concealed hunger. "If Amara's comfortable with that, I'd be more than happy to help her get back into the flow of things." Amara felt the familiar pre-fight sensation, time slowing, senses sharpening, the world narrowing to just her and the predator across from her. She recognized the look in Xavier's eyes, the same expression her daughter's school bullies had worn when they thought they'd found easy prey they'd learned differently. Violently. "I don't think that's necessary," she began. "Come on," Xavier interrupted with a laugh that had an edge to it now. "What's the worst that could happen? I'll go easy on you, Mama." Think of it as a very gentle reintroduction to sparring. The gymnasium had grown quieter, other students sensing the shift in energy. Amara felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of being judged, dismissed, written off as just another suburban mom playing at being dangerous. But underneath the grief and exhaustion, something else was stirring. Something that had been sleeping for 8 months, buried beneath guilt and loss and the crushing weight of a world that no longer made sense. Xavier was still talking, his voice getting louder, more insistent. "Seriously, it'll be fun. Just some light contact. I promise I won't hurt you, Mama. I promise I won't hurt you, Mama." The words hit like a physical blow. Amara looked up at him then, really looked, and Xavier Thompson saw something in her eyes that made his next joke die in his throat. For just a moment, the grieving mother disappeared, and someone else looked back at him. Someone who had stood in rings where the only sounds were breathing and the wet impact of bone on bone. Someone who had never needed anyone's promise not to hurt her. Someone who had earned her nickname by being the last thing her opponents ever saw coming. "Okay," Amara said quietly, her voice carrying a strange new quality that made Master Chun take a step back. "Let's spar." The silence that followed Amara's acceptance was the kind that precedes earthquakes, heavy, electric, and pregnant with the promise of destruction. Xavier's friend Tyler whistled low. "Oh snap, she actually said yes. This is about to be entertaining." But Xavier wasn't laughing anymore. Something in Amara's voice had shifted, like hearing a house cat purr and suddenly realizing you were listening to a panther. Still, his pride was a living thing that fed on dominance, and backing down now would be social suicide. "All right then," he said, forcing his trademark grin back into place. "Let's make this interesting. Master Chen, you mind officiating this little exhibition?" Master Chen's weathered face was unreadable, but his eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too many cocky students learn hard lessons. "Very well. But we do this properly. Protective gear, controlled contact, and the match ends when I say it ends." The main training area had transformed into an amphitheater of anticipation. Word had spread through the gym with the speed of wildfire. The arrogant instructor was about to spar the new mom. Students abandoned their workouts. Phones emerged to capture what promised to be either humiliation or comedy gold. Amara walked toward the equipment area with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the suddenly cavernous space. Her hands were steady as she selected gloves, headgear, mouthguard, the armor of war she'd worn like a second skin in another lifetime. "You sure about this, Mama?" Tyler called out, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Xavier's got 47 wins and 0 losses. Might want to reconsider before you get embarrassed." Amara paused in lacing her gloves, and for a heartbeat, the gymnasium held its breath. When she looked up, her eyes held a quality that made Tyler's smirk falter. 47 wins, she repeated softly, testing the weight of the words. "That's cute." The comment hit the air like a match in a gas station. Xavier's jaw tightened, his easy confidence fracturing just slightly around the edges. "Excuse me?" "Nothing." Amara finished with her gloves and rolled her shoulders, the movement causing her loose t-shirt to pull tight across muscles that suddenly seemed more defined than they had moments before. Just wondering if any of those 47 wins came against anyone who actually knew how to fight back. The challenge hung between them like a loaded gun. Xavier felt his face flush, aware that every eye in the gym was now watching his reaction. The woman who'd seemed so timid, so obviously out of her element, was looking at him like he was prey. "You know what?" His voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I was going to take it easy on you. Show you some basic techniques, maybe boost your confidence a little. But since you want to run your mouth, since I want to what?" Amara's tone was still soft, but there was something underneath it now, something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Nothing. Let's just get this over with." Xavier stalked toward the center mat, his usual fluid grace replaced by the tight, aggressive movements of wounded pride. Master Chen stepped between them, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Before we begin, I want to make the rules clear. This is controlled sparring. No strikes to the back of the head, no joint locks, no throws. Light to medium contact only. The match ends at my discretion or when someone yields. Are we understood?" Both fighters nodded, but neither took their eyes off the other. "Touch gloves and return to your corners." The moment their gloves met, Amara felt it, that electric surge that had been absent from her life for 8 months. The world snapped into crystalline focus, sounds becoming sharper, colors more vivid, time itself seeming to slow to a crawl. "For you, baby girl. This one's for you." They circled each other like predators, Xavier bouncing on his toes with the flashy footwork that had intimidated countless opponents. His reach advantage was significant, his technical skills obvious, his confidence radiating from every movement. But Amara moved like smoke given form, fluid, unpredictable, seeming to drift just out of range while never taking her eyes off a centerline. "Come on, mama," Xavier taunted, throwing a lazy jab that fell short by inches. "Show me what you learned in those fitness classes." The words were meant to rattle her, to break her concentration. Instead, they had the opposite effect. Amara's expression went completely blank, and Xavier felt the first cold finger of real fear touch his spine, through a combination then, jab, cross, hook, the kind of textbook sequence that had dismantled dozens of opponents. Fast, technically perfect, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never met his match. Amara moved. Not the clumsy, panicked movement Xavier expected, but something that defied physics. She seemed to fold in on herself, slipping the jab by millimeters, ducking under the cross as if she'd known it was coming, and as the hook whistled over her head, she was already inside his guard. The counterpunch came from nowhere, short, vicious uppercut that started somewhere around her ankles and traveled through her entire body like a freight train, catching Xavier flush on the solar plexus with a sound like a hammer hitting wet clay. Xavier folded around the punch, his breath leaving his lungs in a harsh whoosh as he staggered backward. The crowd's excited chatter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. But Amara wasn't finished. She flowed forward like water finding its level, her left hand snapping out in a jab that rattled Xavier's teeth, followed immediately by a right cross that would have decapitated him if she put her full weight behind it. Even pulling the punch, the impact sent him stumbling across the mat. What the Tyler started to say, but the words died in his throat as he watched his unbeatable friend get systematically dismantled. Xavier tried to reset, to use his reach advantage, to establish the distance where his technical superiority could reassert itself. But Amara moved like she could read his mind, slipping punches by fractions of inches, countering with precision that bordered on supernatural, leg kick that buckled his knee, an elbow that split his lip, a body shot that doubled him over gasping. The gymnasium had gone graveyard quiet except for the wet sounds of impact and Xavier's increasingly labored breathing. This wasn't sparring anymore. It was an education in violence delivered by a professor who'd forgotten more about fighting than most people would ever learn. "Stop," Xavier gasped, raising one glove in surrender. "Stop, I yield." But Master Chun was already stepping between them, his face grave. "Enough. The match is over." Amara stepped back immediately. Her breathing barely elevated, not a mark on her face. She began removing her gloves with the same methodical precision she'd used to put them on, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Xavier, meanwhile, was bent over with his hands on his knees, blood dripping from his split lip onto the pristine mat. When he finally looked up, his eyes held the hollow shock of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. "Who are you?" he whispered. Amara paused in unlacing her gloves, and for a moment, the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Nobody special. Just a mom." The crowd began to murmur, then talk, then buzz with excitement as the implications of what they'd witnessed began to sink in. Phone cameras that had been recording hoping for comedy gold now held footage of something far more precious, the moment an undefeated champion learned what real fighting looked like. Tyler pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "Yo, X, you good? What the hell just happened?" But Xavier wasn't looking at his friend. He was staring at Amara with a mixture of awe, confusion, and something else, something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine respect he'd felt for another human being in years. "I don't understand," he said, struggling to straighten up. "How did you, where did you learn to move like that?" Amara finished packing her gear into her bag, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much violence, survived too much loss. "Some lessons you can't learn in a gym, Xavier. Some skills you earn in places where losing means more than just hurt pride." She headed toward the exit, but Master Chen's voice stopped her. "Ms. Washington. A word, if you please." The crowd began to disperse, leaving Xavier standing alone in the center of the mat, touching his split lip and trying to process what had just happened to his perfect record and his even more perfect ego. CTA2, have you ever witnessed a moment where someone completely shocked everyone with hidden skills? What's the most incredible plot twist you've seen in real life? Share your jaw-dropping stories below. Amara turned back, her bag slung over her shoulder, suddenly looking less like a warrior goddess and more like what she'd been when she walked in, a tired woman carrying invisible wounds. "Yes, Master Chen. That was instructive. For all of us." His eyes held depths of understanding that came from decades of watching human nature play out on training mats. "I suspect there's much more to your story than what we saw here today." Amara glanced back at Xavier, who was now surrounded by concerned students but kept stealing glances in her direction. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify, too complex to categorize. "There always is," she said quietly. "The question is whether anyone really wants to hear it." She walked toward the door, leaving behind a gymnasium full of people whose assumptions about strength, motherhood, and the nature of real power had just been obliterated in the span of 3 devastating minutes. Behind her, Xavier Thompson, undefeated regional champion, heir to a martial arts dynasty, the man who thought he knew everything about fighting, stood in the center of the mat with blood on his lips and revolution in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he'd met someone who made him want to be better instead of just wanting to prove he was the best. The problem was, she was already walking away. The silence in the parking lot was deafening. Amara sat in her Honda Civic with the engine off, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Through the windshield, she could see the gym's windows glowing in the early evening light, figures moving inside like shadows in a fishbowl. What the hell did you just do? The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the familiar cocktail of guilt and self-recrimination that had become her constant companion. She'd promised herself, promised her therapist, promised her sister, promised the memory of her daughter, that she would never fight again. That she would never let that darkness back into her life. But the moment Xavier had called her mama, with that dismissive smirk, something had snapped. 8 months of grief, rage, and helplessness had erupted out of her like a dam bursting, and she'd done what she always did when cornered. She destroyed the threat. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. How did it go? Feel better. Feel better. The question was a knife between her ribs. She'd felt alive for the first time in months, and that terrified her more than anything Xavier could have done to her in that ring. Back inside the gym, Xavier was discovering that being humiliated in front of your students and peers was a unique form of psychological torture. The concerned voices asking if he was okay, the barely concealed excitement in people's eyes as they replayed what they'd witnessed, the way conversations stopped when he walked by, it all felt like drowning in slow motion. "Dude, you need to ice that lip," Tyler said for the 3rd time, following Xavier into the locker room. "And maybe we should talk about what just happened out there." Nothing happened. Xavier's voice was flat, mechanical. "I underestimated her, that's all. Let my guard down." "Let your guard down." Tyler's voice rose an octave. "Bro, she dismantled you like you were a training dummy. That wasn't luck or you going easy, that was pure skill." Xavier turned on him with eyes that could have melted steel. "Drop it, Tyler. Now." But Tyler, loyal friend that he was, couldn't let it go. "I'm just saying, maybe you should find out who she really is. Because that wasn't some suburban mom who took a few kickboxing classes. That was someone who's been in real fights. Serious fights." The words hit harder than any of Amara's punches had. Xavier stared at his reflection in the locker room mirror, split lip, bruised pride, the carefully constructed image of invincibility cracked down the middle like a broken window, built his entire identity around being untouchable. The undefeated champion. The instructor who could dismantle any challenger. The man who belonged at the top of every hierarchy he'd ever entered, and 3 minutes. A woman he dismissed as irrelevant had reduced all of that to rubble. She got lucky, he said finally, his voice lacking conviction even to his own ears. Tyler stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Lucky? Xavier, she read you like a children's book. Every move you made, she was already 2 steps ahead. That's not luck, that's experience you can't fake. Meanwhile, in the main gym, Master Chun was fielding questions from students who couldn't stop talking about what they'd witnessed. The footage was already making rounds on social media, shaky phone videos capturing the moment their invincible instructor met his match. Master Chun, Jessica approached him with her tablet, her expression troubled. You need to see this. The tablet showed a grainy video from 5 years ago, underground fight footage from Detroit. A woman in black shorts and a sports bra, her face partially obscured by shadows, systematically destroying opponent after opponent with the same fluid precision they just witnessed. The announcer's voice crackled through the poor audio. Ladies and gentlemen, still undefeated, the Angel of Death. Master Chun watched the woman on screen throw the same uppercut that had folded Xavier like a lawn chair, and his blood went cold. Sir. Jessica's voice seemed to come from very far away. Should we call her? Before Master Chun could answer, the gym's front door exploded open. Xavier stormed in, his eyes wild, still wearing his training gear with dried blood on his split lip. Where is she? He demanded, scanning the gym like a man possessed. Xavier, you should go home, Master Chun said carefully. Rest. Process what happened today. Process. Xavier's laugh was sharp, bitter. You want me to process getting humiliated by someone who's supposed to be a beginner? You want me to process having my entire life's work made to look like amateur hour? The few remaining students had gone quiet, sensing the dangerous energy radiating from their instructor. This wasn't the confident, controlled Xavier they knew. This was something raw and wounded and unpredictable. She's gone, Master Chun said simply. And perhaps that's for the best. For the best. Xavier's voice cracked. Do you have any idea what just happened here? What this does to my reputation? My career? Your career will survive, Master Chun replied, his tone carrying the weight of decades of wisdom. Your ego, however, might need some adjustment. The words hit like a slap. Xavier felt his face flush, the familiar rage building in his chest, the same rage that had driven him to excellence, that had made him untouchable, that had also made him insufferable. You think this is about ego? He snarled. You think I'm just some spoiled rich boy who can't handle losing? Master Chen's expression didn't change. Aren't you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Xavier opened his mouth to fire back, to defend himself, to prove that he was more than just privileged arrogance in designer training gear. But the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down, in a place he'd spent years avoiding, Xavier knew the old man was right. Outside in the parking lot, Amara had finally started her car, but she couldn't bring herself to put it in drive. Her phone was buzzing with notifications, texts from her sister, missed calls from unknown numbers, social media alerts she didn't understand. She pulled up the first video someone had tagged her in, and her blood turned to ice water. The footage was shaky, clearly shot on a phone, but it captured everything. Her systematic destruction of Xavier, the way she'd moved like violence given form, the moment she'd transformed from grieving mother into something much more dangerous. The comments were already pouring in. Holy shit, who is this woman? That's the Angel of Death from the underground circuit. Xavier Thompson just got destroyed by a mom. Someone find out who she is. Amara's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the comments, watching her carefully constructed anonymity crumble in real time. She'd spent 8 months trying to disappear, trying to become invisible, trying to protect what was left of her broken life. Now she was trending on 3 different platforms. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Then again. Another unknown number. And again. Shit, she whispered, turning off her phone entirely. But it was too late. The internet had found her, and the internet never forgot. Back inside the gym, Xavier was pacing like a caged animal, his mind racing through the implications of what had happened. His undefeated record was gone. His reputation as an untouchable instructor was shattered. Students would question him, rivals would smell weakness, sponsors might pull funding. But underneath all of that, something else was eating at him, something he couldn't name or understand. The way she'd moved. The complete absence of fear in her eyes. The casual, almost bored efficiency with which she dismantled him, never seen anything like it, never wanted anything more in his life than to understand it. "I need to find her," he said suddenly, stopping his pacing to look at Master Chun. "Why?" The question caught Xavier off guard. Why did he need to find her? To demand a rematch? To prove it was a fluke? To salvage his pride? Or something else entirely? "Because," he said slowly, the word surprising him as much as anyone, "I need to know who she really is." Master Chun studied him for a long moment, seeing something in his star pupil's eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility, perhaps. Or maybe just the first crack in the armor of arrogance that had been suffocating the man underneath. "And what makes you think she wants to be found?" Xavier had no answer for that. But as he stood there in the gym where his perfect world had just collapsed, one thing became crystal clear. He was going to find Amara Washington. Even if it destroyed what was left of his carefully constructed life. Even if she destroyed him again in the process. Because for the first time in his existence, Xavier Thompson had met someone who made him feel something other than superior. And that feeling, terrifying as it was, felt more real than anything he'd ever experienced. The problem was, Amara Washington was sitting in her car in the parking lot, watching her old life explode across social media, and planning to disappear before anyone could drag her back into a world she'd sworn to leave behind. The dance of approach and retreat was about to begin. And neither of them realized that some forces, once set in motion, couldn't be stopped. 24 hours later, Amara's careful plan to disappear was falling apart faster than her car's transmission. She sat in the waiting room of Mike's Auto Repair, staring at an estimate that might as well have been written in blood. $850. Money she didn't have. Money she couldn't get. Money that stood between her and the escape she desperately needed. "Sorry, Ms. Washington," Mike said, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "The transmission's shot. Without the repair, that car ain't going nowhere." Amara closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully controlled world closing in. The video had gone viral overnight, 2 million views and climbing. Her phone hadn't stopped already identified her as the angel of death from the underground circuit, and now every MMA blog, sports journalist, and fight promoter in the country was trying to track her down. She needed to disappear. Instead, she was stranded. "How long for the repair?" she asked, already knowing she couldn't afford the answer. "Parts won't be in for 3 days. Labor on top of that. We're looking at a week, maybe more." A week. 7 days in a city where her face was now plastered across social media, where every gym rat and fight fan would recognize her, where, "Excuse me, are you Amara Washington?" The voice made her blood freeze. She turned slowly to find a young man with a press badge and hungry eyes standing in the doorway of the repair shop. "I'm Jake Morrison from MMA Weekly. I was hoping we could talk about your fight with Xavier Thompson yesterday. Our readers are dying to know, where have you been for the past 2 years? Are you planning a comeback? What was it like destroying an undefeated champion?" Amara stood up so fast her chair scraped against the concrete floor. No comment. "But surely you want to tell your side of the story? Social media is going crazy with theories. Some people are saying Xavier threw the fight, others think it was staged. Don't you want to set the record straight?" I said no comment. Amara pushed past him toward the door, but Jake wasn't giving up easily. "What about your daughter? Sophia Washington, right? I heard she passed away 8 months ago. Is that why you disappeared from fighting? Were you using Xavier as some kind of outlet for your grief?" The mention of her daughter's name hit like a physical blow. Amara spun around, and Jake saw something in her eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. "If you ever," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "ever mention my daughter again, I will show you exactly why they called me the Angel of Death. And unlike yesterday, I won't be pulling my punches." Jake's face went pale, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. She said no comment. Xavier Thompson stepped into the repair shop like he owned it, his presence filling the small space with an energy that made both Amara and Jake freeze. He was wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt instead of his usual designer training gear, and there was something different about his face. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by something harder to read. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I'm the guy she embarrassed yesterday," Xavier said evenly. "And I'm telling you to leave. Now. This is a public place." "I have every right to." Xavier moved closer, and suddenly Jake understood why this man had been undefeated for so long. Even diminished, even humbled, Xavier radiated the kind of controlled danger that made smart people reconsider their life choices. "You have the right to leave under your own power," Xavier said quietly. "Or you can leave the way she would have made you leave. Your choice." Jake looked between them, the woman who'd become an overnight internet sensation and the man she destroyed to get there, and apparently decided that discretion was the better part of journalism. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing toward the door. "The story's going to come out eventually." "Not today," Xavier replied, and something in his tone suggested that Jake should probably start looking for a different story to chase. After the reporter left, silence settled over the repair shop like dust after an explosion. Amara stared at Xavier, trying to reconcile this controlled, almost protective version of him with the arrogant instructor who'd mocked her less than 24 hours ago. "What are you doing here?" she asked finally. Xavier's jaw tightened. "Same thing you are, apparently. My Porsche decided to break down this morning." Mike looked up from his paperwork. "Yeah, that's gonna be a hell of a repair bill. German engineering, beautiful when it works, expensive when it doesn't." Amara felt a laugh bubbling up in her throat, bitter, ironic, tinged with hysteria. "Perfect. Just perfect." "What's perfect?" Xavier asked. "This." She gestured around the repair shop. "Being trapped here with you while every fight journalist in the country tries to hunt me down. My car's dead, your car's dead, and apparently I'm famous again whether I want to be or not." Xavier studied her face, noting the exhaustion around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. Yesterday, she'd been a force of nature, untouchable and devastating. Today, she looked like someone barely holding herself together. "You don't want the attention," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to disappear," Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to go somewhere no one knows my name or my face or what I used to be. I want to be invisible." "Why?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Amara looked at Xavier, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not the hunger for revenge she'd been bracing for, not the wounded pride demanding satisfaction. Genuine curiosity. Maybe even concern. "Because," she said slowly, "some things are better left buried." Xavier nodded like he understood, though she suspected he didn't. Not really. How could someone who'd probably never lost anything explain the weight of surviving when the person you were supposed to protect didn't? "Look," he said, running a hand through his hair, "I know this is weird. Yesterday, you made me question everything I thought I knew about fighting, about myself. Today we're both stuck here dealing with reporters and broken cars. Your point?" "My point is that maybe we can help each other. You want to disappear, I get that. I want to understand what happened yesterday. Maybe we can figure out a way to give us both what we need." Amara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You want me to train you? I want you to teach me how to be better than I was." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the arrogant instructor demanding a rematch or making excuses for his loss. This was someone who'd been fundamentally changed by their encounter and was trying to figure out what came next. "I don't train people anymore," she said. "Why not?" "Because everyone I've ever trained, everyone I've ever cared about, everyone I've ever tried to protect." She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Because I'm not good for people. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd said and what she hadn't said. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, social media notifications scrolling by too fast to read. I'm getting destroyed out there, he said simply. Students are questioning whether they want to train with someone who got beaten by a nobody. Sponsors are asking questions. My whole career is built on being unbeatable, and you proved that was a lie. So maybe we both need to disappear for a while. Maybe we both need time to figure out who we are when we're not performing for everyone else. Amara stared at him, trying to detect the angle, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was a man whose perfect world had collapsed, just like hers had 8 months ago. What are you suggesting? I've got a cabin up in the mountains. No cell service, no internet, no reporters. Enough space for 2 people to figure their shit out without the whole world watching. The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Dangerous, because it came from someone who'd been her enemy yesterday. Tempting, because it offered the one thing she needed most, escape. Why would you help me? She asked. Xavier was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. Because yesterday, for the first time in my life, someone showed me what real strength looks like. And I think maybe I need to learn the difference between being strong and just being afraid of being weak. CTA 3. Sometimes the people who challenge us most become the ones who help us grow. Have you ever found unexpected help from someone you initially saw as an opponent? Share your stories of unlikely alliances in the comments. Outside, another car pulled into the parking lot. Through the window, Amara could see 2 more people with cameras and notepads getting out. Shit, she muttered. They found me. Xavier followed her gaze and saw the approaching reporters. Without hesitation, he moved to stand between Amara and the window. My truck's parked around back, he said quietly. If you want to disappear, now's your chance. Amara looked at him, this man who'd humiliated her with his arrogance yesterday, who'd just offered her sanctuary, who was now literally standing between her and the wolves at the door. I don't know you, she said. I don't know you either. Maybe that's the point. The reporters were at the door now, their voices rising as they spotted movement inside the shop. In about 30 seconds, her hiding place would be compromised, and the feeding frenzy would begin in earnest. She had a choice to make. Trust the stranger who'd become her enemy, who was now offering to be her ally, or face the cameras, the questions, the inevitable resurrection of everything she'd spent 8 months trying to bury. Okay, she said, the word coming out before she could stop it. But I'm driving. Xavier's mouth quirked up in what might have been the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Deal. But just so we're clear, I don't know anything about you except that you can fight like hell and you're running from something that's eating you alive. And I don't know anything about you except that you're an arrogant ass who just offered to help someone who humiliated you in front of your entire gym. They looked at each other for a moment. 2 broken people about to embark on what was either the worst decision of their lives or the first step toward finding something they'd both lost. This is insane, Amara said. Completely, Xavier agreed. And together, they headed for the back door, leaving behind the reporters, the broken cars, and the lives that had just stopped fitting. Neither of them realized that running away together was about to become the first step toward running toward something neither had dared to hope for. But some journeys begin with destruction. And some healings start with 2 people who have nothing left to lose. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road like a secret the mountains had been keeping. Rustic wood and stone, surrounded by towering pines that filter the afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. No power lines, no cell towers, no connection to the world that had become too much for both of them to bear. Amara stood on the wraparound porch, breathing air so clean it made her lungs ache. For the first time in months, she couldn't hear traffic, couldn't smell exhaust, couldn't feel the weight of other people's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. It's not much, Xavier said, carrying their bags up the steps. But it's quiet. Quiet is good, she replied, though part of her was already wondering if the silence would be blessing or curse. Silence meant space for thoughts. Space for memories. Space for the grief she'd been outrunning since the day they lowered her daughter's casket into the ground. The cabin's interior was sparse but comfortable. Stone fireplace, leather furniture that had seen better decades, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a different century. What caught Amara's attention, though, were the photographs scattered across the mantel. Xavier as a child, maybe 7 or 8, standing stiffly next to a man in an expensive suit who shared his bone structure but none of his warmth. Xavier in high school, holding a trophy, his smile looking forced even in victory. Xavier at his college graduation, surrounded by people who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread about inherited wealth. "Your family?" she asked. "My father's idea of family," Xavier replied, his voice tight. "Every photo is a performance. Every moment documented for posterity." Amara picked up one of the frames, a formal portrait of Xavier, maybe 16, standing between the same cold-eyed man and a woman whose smile looked like it had been surgically enhanced. "You look miserable." I was miserable. Am miserable. Was raised to be miserable, actually. Xavier moved to the kitchen, busying himself with coffee that neither of them really wanted. "My father, Richard Mitchell, owns half the commercial real estate in the state. My mother, Patricia, collects charity galas and tennis trophies. They wanted a son who would carry on the family tradition of being rich, successful, and completely empty inside." There was something in his voice, a bitterness that went deeper than typical parent-child conflict. Amara set the photo down and studied his profile as he worked. "That's why you fight," she said. It wasn't a question. Xavier's hands stilled on the coffee maker. "Fighting was supposed to be my rebellion. My one authentic thing in a life built on appearances and expectations. Turns out I just brought the same need to win, to dominate, to prove I was better than everyone else. Until yesterday. Until yesterday." He turned to face her, and she saw something raw in his expression. "You want to know the worst part? When you beat me, when you made me look like an amateur in front of everyone. For about 10 seconds, I felt relief." The admission hung between them like a confession at church. Amara recognized the weight of it, the cost of speaking a truth that heavy. Relief. Like maybe I could stop pretending to be perfect. Maybe I could just be human for a while. Amara understood that feeling better than she cared to admit. She moved to the window, staring out at the trees that swayed like dancers in the mountain breeze. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. "Do you?" She was quiet for so long Xavier thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of months of carefully buried pain. "I started fighting when I was 12. Group home in Detroit, rough neighborhood, rougher kids. I was small, mixed race, smart enough to make other kids feel stupid. Perfect target." Xavier poured 2 cups of coffee, moving carefully, sensing that any sudden movement might spook her back into silence. There was this old man, Roberto Santos. Former boxer, ran a gym in the basement of a community center. He saw me get jumped one day, watched me take a beating without crying, without begging. Afterward, he asked me if I wanted to learn how to make sure it never happened again. She accepted the coffee he offered, wrapping her hands around the warm mug like it was an anchor. I was good. Better than good. By 16, I was beating grown men in underground fights, earning enough money to get my own place, to stay in school, to build something resembling a life. But fighting became everything. My identity, my value, my only way of proving I deserved to exist. She took a sip of coffee, buying time before the harder part of the story. When I was 21, I met David. Sweet guy, gentle guy, everything I thought I didn't deserve. He was finishing medical school, had this idea that he could save me from the violence. Xavier settled into the chair across from her, recognizing the careful distance she was keeping, close enough to tell the story, far enough to run if it became too much. We got married. I kept fighting, but smaller venues, safer opponents. David hated it, but he tolerated it because he loved me. Then I got pregnant. Her voice wavered slightly, and Xavier felt something twist in his chest. This was the story she'd been carrying alone, the weight that had been crushing her from the inside. Sophia. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, most perfect thing I'd ever seen. Amara's smile was heartbreaking in its gentleness. I quit fighting the day she was born. Hung up my gloves, walked away from everything that had defined me, because being her mother was the only identity that mattered anymore. The coffee in Xavier's cup had gone cold, but he didn't notice. He was watching Amara's face, seeing the way her features transformed when she talked about her daughter, softer, younger, lit from within by a love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. David died when Sophie was 3. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. Suddenly, I was a single mom with medical bills, a mortgage, and no marketable skills except the ability to hurt people. You went back to fighting. Underground circuit, bare-knuckle stuff, no rules except don't die in the ring. Dangerous, but it paid enough to keep us afloat. Sophie never knew. I told her I worked nights doing inventory at a warehouse. Xavier found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite its growing darkness. For 4 years, I lived a double life. PDA meetings and birthday parties during the day, cage fights and hospital visits at night. I was undefeated because I fought like someone with everything to lose. Because I was. She stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace where Xavier's childhood photos watched like silent judges. 8 months ago, I had a fight scheduled in Chicago. Big money, enough to finally get us out of that neighborhood, maybe even buy a house with a yard where Sophie could play safely. Her voice was getting smaller, more fragile, and Xavier felt his chest tighten with dread. There was a fire at her school. Some kind of electrical problem in the gymnasium where they were having an assembly. Sophie's class was trapped on the 2nd floor. The words came out in a rush now, like poison she needed to expel before it killed her. I was in Chicago, getting my hands wrapped for a fight, when my sister called. By the time I got back to Detroit, by the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone. Smoke inhalation. She died asking for her mommy, and her mommy was 800 miles away beating some woman unconscious for money. The silence that followed was the kind that lives in hospitals and funeral homes, heavy, absolute, suffocating in its weight. Xavier set down his coffee cup and moved to where she stood, stopping just close enough to offer presence without demanding contact. "It wasn't your fault," he said quietly. "Wasn't it?" She turned to face him, and her eyes held a pain so deep it made his own troubles feel trivial. "I chose money over being there. I chose my addiction to violence over my daughter's safety. You chose to provide for her the only way you knew how. I chose wrong." The words came out flat, final, like a judge reading a verdict. And she paid the price. Xavier understood now, the weight she carried, the reason she tried to disappear, the fury that had driven her to destroy him in that gym. She wasn't just fighting him, she was fighting herself, fighting the guilt that was eating her alive, fighting the world that had taken the only good thing she'd ever created. After the funeral, I packed up everything, sold the house, and tried to disappear. I thought if I could become invisible, if I could stop being the angel of death, maybe I could find some kind of peace. But you couldn't. You can't outrun yourself. You can't hide from your own shadow. She looked at the photos on his mantle, at his stiff, performative childhood. At least you had parents, even if they were terrible. At least you had something resembling a normal life before you screwed it up. The comment stung, but Xavier recognized it for what it was, deflection, the way wounded animals lash out when cornered. "You're right," he said simply. "I had advantages you never did. I had safety, education, opportunities handed to me on silver platters. And I still managed to become someone I don't recognize in the mirror." Amara studied his face, searching for the defense, the justification, the anger she expected. Instead, she found only honesty. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she said finally. "The woman who had everything that mattered and lost it, and the man who had everything that didn't matter and threw it away." "Maybe that's why we're here," Xavier replied. "Maybe we're supposed to help each other figure out how to build something better from the wreckage." Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Inside the cabin, two broken people sat in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of their separate pasts and the uncertain promise of whatever came next. Neither of them realized that sharing their deepest wounds was the first step toward healing them. Neither of them understood that sometimes you have to break completely before you can rebuild into something stronger. But the mountain silence held space for both their pain and their possibility, and for the first time in months. Neither of them felt entirely alone. The question was whether they could learn to trust each other with the pieces of themselves they'd thought were too damaged to ever be whole again. The morning came slowly to the mountains, filtered through pine needles and wrapped in mist that clung to the valley like a gentle embrace. Amara woke on the cabin's couch to the sound of chopping wood and the smell of coffee brewing, domestic sounds that felt foreign after months of sterile hotel rooms and sleepless nights. Through the window, she could see Xavier splitting logs with methodical precision, each swing of the axe carrying a rhythm that spoke of someone working through thoughts too complex for words. He'd stripped down to a t-shirt despite the mountain chill, and she found herself studying the controlled power in his movements, so different from the flashy demonstrations she'd witnessed at the gym. "You're staring." Amara startled, not realizing he'd noticed her watching. Xavier set the axe aside and wiped his hands on a towel, his expression unreadable in the morning light. "I was thinking," she said, moving away from the window. About how different you look when you're not performing for an audience." The observation hung between them as Xavier stepped onto the porch, bringing with him the scent of pine and honest sweat. This close, Amara could see the changes that 24 hours away from his perfect life had already wrought, stubble softening the harsh lines of his jaw, tension easing from shoulders that had carried the weight of impossible expectations. "Performing," he repeated, testing the word. "Is that what I was doing? Isn't it what we all do?" Amara moved to the kitchen, needing something to occupy her hands. Create a version of ourselves that we think the world wants to see, then spend so much energy maintaining the performance that we forget who we actually are underneath. Xavier followed her inside, accepting the coffee she offered with hands that were rougher than they'd been 2 days ago. Real work, she realized. When was the last time he'd done something just because it needed doing, not because it served his image? "So who are you when you're not performing?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She'd spent so many months defining herself by her failures. The mother who wasn't there, the fighter who'd walked away, the woman who'd lost everything that mattered, that she'd forgotten there might be anything else left. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I used to be Sophie's mom. Before that, I was the angel of death. Before that, I was just a scared kid trying to survive. But now you're just Amara." Just Amara feels like not enough. Xavier set down his coffee and moved closer, not invading her space but offering his presence. "Maybe just Amara is exactly who you're supposed to be." They spent the morning in comfortable silence, Amara reading a book she'd found on the shelf, Xavier working on repairs the cabin had been needing for months. There was something healing in the ordinariness of it, the way they could exist in the same space without needing to fill every moment with words or explanations. It was Xavier who broke first. "I've never done this before," he said, looking up from the loose floorboard he'd been fixing. "Done what?" "Spent time with someone without trying to impress them. Without needing to prove I was better, smarter, stronger." He sat back on his heels, studying her face. "It's terrifying." Amara looked up from her book, a worn copy of poetry that someone had left behind years ago. "Why terrifying?" "Because what if there's nothing underneath the performance? What if I take away the achievements and the titles and the reputation, and there's just nothing?" The vulnerability in his voice was so raw it made her chest ache. She recognized that fear, had lived with it every day since Sophie died. The terror that without her role as protector, provider, mother, she was just empty space shaped like a person. "There's something," she said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because you brought me here. Because you stood between me and those reporters. Because you're fixing floorboards that don't belong to you just because they needed fixing." She closed the book and met his eyes. "That's not nothing, Xavier. That's everything." The afternoon found them on the cabin's back deck, sharing a lunch of sandwiches and the kind of conversation that only happened when people stopped trying to manage impressions. Xavier told her about the pressure of growing up in a family where love was conditional on achievement, where every conversation was an evaluation, every moment a performance review. Amara shared stories about Sophie, not the tragic ending, but the bright, fierce, funny little girl who'd made knock-knock jokes that didn't make sense and insisted on wearing tutus to the grocery store. She would have liked you, Amara said suddenly, the words surprising them both. Yeah. She had this thing about underdogs. Always rooted for the losing team, brought home every stray cat in the neighborhood. Amara smiled at the memory. She would have seen right through your tough guy act to the person underneath. What person? The one who's sitting here fixing my broken heart instead of demanding I fix his wounded pride. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, processing words that no one had ever said to him before. In his world, relationships were transactions. What you could give, what you could get, what advantage could be gained. The idea that someone might value him for something as simple as kindness felt revolutionary. Tell me about the first time you fought, he said, changing the subject before the emotion became too much to handle. Which time? First time I got in a fight, or first time I won one? First time you realized you were different from other people. Amara leaned back in her chair, her eyes going distant. I was 14. Group home had this rule about lights out at 9, but there was this girl Maria, who had nightmares. Bad ones. She'd wake up screaming, and the night staff would just tell her to shut up and go back to sleep. Xavier found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story. One night, I heard her crying in the bathroom. She was cutting herself with a piece of broken mirror, just trying to feel something other than the fear. I took the glass away, cleaned her up, sat with her until morning. That's not fighting. No, but it's when I realized that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is just stay. Just be present when someone's world is falling apart. She looked at him directly. The fighting came later, when other kids tried to hurt her because she was weak. I made sure they understood that hurting Maria meant going through me. And they stopped. They stopped. Amara's smile was small but real. Not because I beat them up, though I did, but because they realized someone cared enough about her to fight for her. That's when I understood that strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you're willing to protect. Xavier felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of knots he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. I've never fought for anyone but myself. Maybe that's why you lost. The word should have stung, but instead they felt like a key turning in a lock. Xavier had spent his entire life fighting to prove his worth, to establish dominance, to feed an ego that was never quite satisfied. The idea that fighting could be about something other than himself, about protection, about love, about standing between someone vulnerable and the things that would hurt them, was completely foreign. Teach me, he said suddenly. Teach you what? How to fight for something other than my own pride. Amara studied his face, searching for the angle, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was a man who'd had everything stripped away and was trying to figure out how to build something better from the ruins. It's not something you can learn in a few lessons, she said carefully. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I. The admission surprised them both. Somewhere between sharing their damage and discovering they could exist in the same space without destroying each other, the idea of leaving had begun to feel less like escape and more like abandonment. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, they found themselves sitting by the fire Xavier had built, the flames casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with possibility rather than tension. Can I ask you something? Xavier said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sure. When you were fighting yesterday, when you destroyed me in front of everyone, what were you thinking about? Amara was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute truth. I was thinking about every time someone underestimated me. Every time someone looked at me and saw weakness instead of strength. Every time someone assumed that being a woman, being a mother, being broken meant I was less than them. She turned to meet his eyes. And I was thinking about Sophie, and how proud she would have been to see her mommy stand up for herself. Xavier felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but expanding. Here was someone who fought from love instead of fear, who drew strength from protection instead of domination, who turned pain into power instead of letting it consume her. I want to learn how to do that, he said. Do what? Fight like you fight. Love like you love. Be strong like you're strong. Amara looked at him across the firelight. This man who'd begun as her tormentor, become her unlikely ally, and was now asking her to teach him how to be human. There was something terrifying about the request, but also something beautiful. For the first time in 8 months, someone was asking her to be a teacher instead of a victim. For the first time in his life, Xavier was asking to be a student instead of a master. Okay, she said simply. Okay. I'll teach you. But not how to fight, how to protect. Not how to win, how to serve. Not how to be strong, how to be brave enough to be vulnerable. Xavier nodded, understanding that she was offering him something far more valuable than martial arts techniques. She was offering him the chance to become someone worth becoming. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying away the last remnants of who they used to be and making space for who they might become together. Neither of them realized that the lessons they were about to share would heal them both in ways they never expected. Neither of them understood that some forms of teaching were really just love disguised as education. But the fire burned warm between them, and for the first time since they'd known each other, the future felt like something worth fighting for. 3 days. 3 perfect, impossible days where the world had consisted of nothing more than morning coffee, shared meals, long conversations that stretched into the night, and the growing understanding that they were healing each other in ways neither had expected. Amara had begun teaching Xavier how to move without aggression, how to find strength in stillness, how to protect rather than dominate. In return, he'd shown her what it felt like to be valued for more than her ability to endure pain, to be seen as someone worth knowing rather than just surviving. He couldn't last. The sound of car engines broke the mountain silence like gunshots. Amara was the first to the window, her body instantly shifting into the alert stance of someone who'd spent years watching for danger. Through the trees, she could see the convoy climbing the winding road. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, moving with the purposeful determination of people who'd finally found what they were looking for. Xavier, she called, her voice tight with warning. He joined her at the window, and she saw his face go ashen as he recognized the lead vehicle. My father, he said, the words falling like stones into still water. The SUVs pulled into the clearing around the cabin with military precision, and Amara felt her chest tighten as she counted the occupants. Not just Xavier's family, reporters, photographers, what looked like private security. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was an invasion. The man who emerged from the lead vehicle was everything Amara had expected from Xavier's descriptions and more. Richard Mitchell carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never met a problem that couldn't be solved with money or force. His expensive suit looked absurd in the mountain setting, but his presence commanded attention anyway. Behind him came a woman who had to be Xavier's mother, artificially perfect in that way that spoke of surgical enhancement and personal trainers, her expression a masterclass in polite disdain. And behind them came the media circus that had been hunting Amara for days. Xavier. Richard's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. What the hell do you think you're doing up here? Through the cabin's thin walls, they could hear car doors slamming, voices rising, the organized chaos of people who'd been planning this confrontation. They found us, Amara said, though it wasn't really a question. The panic was already building in her chest, not the clean fear of physical danger, but the suffocating terror of being trapped, exposed, dragged back into a spotlight she'd never wanted. How? Xavier's voice was hollow with shock. Does it matter? Amara was already moving, grabbing her bag, checking for exits that didn't exist. I have to go. I have to get out of here before Xavier Mitchell. Another voice from outside, this one with the practiced authority of television journalism. This is Rebecca Chun from Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you about your relationship with underground fighter Amara Washington. The words hit like physical blows. Relationship. They'd been here 3 days, and already the media had constructed a narrative, assigned meaning to something that was barely beginning to understand itself. Xavier moved toward the door, his face set in hard lines. I'll handle this. No. Amara grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "You don't understand. Once they start asking questions, once they start digging, then I'll give them answers that protect you. You can't protect me from this." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with the desperation of someone who'd been hunted before. "You don't know what they're capable of. What they'll do to get their story." Outside, the voices were getting closer, more insistent. "Xavier, I know you're in there." Richard Mitchell's voice carried the edge of parental authority backed by unlimited resources. "We need to talk. Now." Xavier looked at Amara, really looked at her, and saw the terror in her eyes. Not the controlled alertness of a fighter assessing threats, but the raw panic of someone whose safe space had been violated. "The back door," he said quietly. "There's a trail that leads down to the old logging road. If you go now, what about you? I'll buy you time. Tell them we had a fight, that you left hours ago." Amara stared at him, processing the offer. He was willing to face his family's wrath, the media circus, the destruction of whatever reputation he had left, just to give her a chance to escape. "Why would you do that?" Before Xavier could answer, the front door exploded open. Richard Mitchell strode into the cabin like he owned it, his eyes scanning the interior with the calculating assessment of someone putting a price tag on everything he saw. Patricia followed, her nose wrinkling as if the rustic surroundings personally offended her. And behind them came the media, cameras, microphones, the hungry attention of people who'd smelled blood in the water. "There you are," Richard said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter cornering prey. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? How much money I've had to spend cleaning up your mess?" Xavier stepped forward, placing himself between his parents and Amara. "This is private property. You're trespassing." "Private property that I own," Richard replied smoothly. "Did you forget that this cabin is held in the family trust? That everything you have, your gym, your reputation, your future, exists at my discretion?" The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and remind Xavier exactly where he stood in the family hierarchy. "Mr. Mitchell," one of the reporters called out, "is it true that your son has been hiding out here with the underground fighter who humiliated him? Are they romantically involved?" "Of course not," Patricia's voice cut through the air like broken glass. "My son has better taste than to involve himself with some common street fighter." The word common hit Amara like a slap. Not because it was unexpected, she'd heard worse from better people, but because of how Patricia said it, with the casual cruelty of someone disposing of garbage. "That's enough." Xavier's voice was dangerous now, carrying the edge of someone whose last nerve had just been severed. "Is it?" Richard smiled, but there was nothing warm in the expression. "Because from where I stand, you've been making a series of catastrophically poor decisions. First, you get beaten by someone who shouldn't have been able to lay a hand on you. Then you disappear with her, creating a scandal that's already cost us 3 sponsorship deals and counting." "Mr. Thompson," another reporter pushed forward, "sources say you've been training with Ms. Washington. Are you planning a comeback fight? Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" The questions were coming faster now, overlapping, building to a crescendo of invasive curiosity that made the cabin feel like it was shrinking around them. "And you," Richard turned his attention to Amara for the first time, his eyes cataloging her with the same cold assessment he'd given the furniture. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now." "I'm not playing any game," Amara replied, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Really? Because it seems awfully convenient that an unknown fighter shows up, humiliates my son in front of cameras, and then disappears with him to a remote location. How much do you want?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Richard Mitchell had just reduced everything, the connection she and Xavier had built, the healing they'd begun, the fragile trust they developed, to a simple financial transaction. "Excuse me. How much money will it take for you to disappear permanently? To sign a non-disclosure agreement and never speak to my son again?" Amara felt something cold and final settle in her chest. This was what Xavier came from, a world where every human connection could be purchased, where love was just another commodity to be bought and sold. "Dad, stop." Xavier's voice was warning now, but Richard was just getting started. 50,000? 100? Name your price, Ms. Washington. I'm sure we can reach an arrangement that works for everyone. You think I'm here for money, aren't you? Patricia joined the attack, her voice dripping with cultured venom. Women like you always are. You find successful men, exploit their weaknesses, extract what you can, and move on to the next target. Women like you. The phrase detonated in Amara's mind like a bomb, bringing with it every dismissal, every assumption, every moment she'd been reduced to a stereotype based on her background, her race, her circumstances. Women like me, she repeated, her voice getting dangerously quiet. Poor women. Desperate women. Women who use their bodies to get what they want because they have nothing else to offer. The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to wound and humiliate. But Patricia Mitchell had made a crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed Amara would crumble under the attack. Instead, she'd just awakened the angel of death. You're right, Amara said, her voice carrying the deadly calm that preceded violence. I am desperate. I am poor. I have used my body to get what I need to survive. She stepped closer to Patricia, and Xavier felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized the shift in her posture. But what I am most of all, Amara continued, is done pretending that people like you deserve my respect just because you were born with money. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Stand up for myself? Refuse to let you buy me like a piece of furniture? The reporters were eating it up, cameras rolling, capturing every moment of the confrontation that was about to destroy whatever chance Xavier and Amara might have had. Amara, please, Xavier stepped between them, his voice desperate. Don't let them do this to you. But it was too late. The damage was done, not by the reporters or the invasion or even the insults, but by the simple crushing realization that this was Xavier's world, a place where everything had a price, where love was weakness, where someone like her would never be anything more than an embarrassment to be managed. This is who you are, she said, looking at Xavier with eyes that held the death of something beautiful. This is where you come from. This isn't me, Xavier replied, his voice breaking. You know this isn't me. Do I? Amara picked up her bag, her movements mechanical now. Because 3 days ago, you sounded exactly like them. 3 days ago, you were exactly like them. That was before. Before what? Before you got bored? Before you decided slumming with the help might be interesting for a weekend. The words were designed to hurt, and they found their target with devastating accuracy. Xavier felt them hit like physical blows, each one confirming every fear he'd ever had about himself. You know that's not true. I don't know anything about you, Amara replied, shouldering her bag. Except that I was an idiot to think someone from your world could ever really see someone from mine as anything more than entertainment. She walked toward the door, and Xavier moved to follow her. Where are you going? Away from this. Away from you. Away from whatever fantasy I was stupid enough to believe in. Ms. Washington. The reporters surged forward like sharks sensing blood. Are you confirming that this was a romantic relationship? What's your response to allegations that this was all a publicity stunt? Amara paused at the threshold, and for a moment, Xavier thought she might turn back, might give him a chance to fix what his family had just destroyed. Instead, she looked directly into the nearest camera. Xavier Thompson is exactly what he appears to be, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. A spoiled rich boy who mistakes cruelty for strength and thinks the world exists for his entertainment. I was foolish enough to think there was something real underneath all that privilege. The words hit Xavier like a physical assault, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. But worse than the public humiliation was the look in her eyes, the death of trust, the return of the walls he'd watched her slowly lower over 3 impossible days. Stay away from me, she said quietly, the words meant only for him. Stay in your world with your money and your family and your perfect life. And forget you ever met the common street fighter who was stupid enough to think you were worth saving. She walked away then, disappearing into the forest as the media circus exploded behind her. Xavier stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching the woman who'd begun to heal his soul vanish into the trees, taking with her any chance he'd ever had of becoming someone worthy of love. Behind him, his father was already working his phone, calling lawyers and publicists, managing the crisis with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades cleaning up other people's messes. "Don't worry," Richard said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "We'll have this contained by morning. A few strategic donations, some carefully worded press releases, and people will forget this ever happened." But Xavier wasn't listening. He was staring at the spot where Amara had disappeared, feeling something inside him die as surely as if his father had put a bullet through his heart. He found love, real love, for the first time in his life. And his family had destroyed it in less than 10 minutes. The worst part was that Amara was right. He was exactly like them. And now he might never get the chance to prove otherwise. The hotel room in downtown Denver was everything Amara had grown to hate. Sterile, anonymous, the kind of place where broken people went to disappear. She'd been there for 18 hours, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone as it buzzed with calls from reporters, fight promoters, and strangers who'd somehow gotten her number. The video had gone viral again. Not the gym footage this time, but the confrontation at the cabin, her walking away from Xavier, her final devastating words captured in high definition for the world to dissect and judge. The comments were predictably brutal. Gold digger got exposed. She was obviously using him for fame. Rich boy dodged a bullet. But buried among the cruelty were other voices, women who recognized something in her story, people who understood what it meant to be judged by circumstances beyond your control, fighters who respected her skill regardless of the drama. Not that any of it mattered. She'd made her choice in that moment of rage and heartbreak, had chosen to burn the bridge rather than risk having her heart shattered again. It was the safe choice. The smart choice, so why did it feel like dying? A knock at the door made her freeze. Hotel staff, probably, or another reporter who'd tracked her down. She'd stopped answering, stopped engaging, stopped caring about anything except the growing numbness that was starting to feel like peace. Amara. The voice through the door was familiar but unexpected. "It's Jessica. From the gym. Can we talk?" Amara opened the door to find Xavier's assistant standing in the hallway, looking nothing like the polished professional she'd met days ago. Jessica's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual composure replaced by something that looked like desperation. "How did you find me?" "Master Chun has connections. Look, I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to tell you what's happening. What Xavier's doing." Despite every instinct screaming at her to slam the door and retreat into numbness, Amara found herself stepping aside to let Jessica enter. "I don't want to hear about Xavier." "Too bad, because you need to." Jessica moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. "Do you know what he did after you left?" "I don't care. He told his father to go to hell. In front of all those reporters. On camera." Jessica turned back to face her. "He said he'd rather lose everything, his trust fund, his gym, his name, than spend another minute pretending to be the kind of man who would treat someone he cared about like garbage." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. She'd expected Xavier to retreat into his privilege, to let his family manage the crisis and protect his reputation. The idea that he'd chosen confrontation over damage control was so far outside her expectations that she couldn't process it. That's stupid," she said finally. "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the first smart thing he's ever done." Jessica pulled out her phone, scrolling to a video. "You want to see what real love looks like?" "No." "Too bad." The video was shaky, clearly shot by one of the reporters, but the audio was crystal clear. Xavier's voice, raw with emotion, cutting through his father's prepared statements. "You want to know the truth? The truth is that woman is worth more than this entire family. She's stronger, braver, and more honest than any of us have ever been. And if treating her with respect means losing everything you think matters, then I guess I'm about to find out what really matters." Amara felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but expanding. The man on the video wasn't the arrogant instructor she'd humiliated or even the vulnerable person she'd begun to heal. This was someone she'd never seen before, someone willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to become worthy of love. "He's been calling you," Jessica continued, "for 18 hours straight. He's driven to 3 different cities looking for you. He fired his publicist for suggesting he throw you under the bus to save his reputation. Jessica, stop. He loves you, Amara. Not the fighter, not the story, not the drama. He loves you. And you're sitting in this hotel room letting fear convince you that love isn't real because it came wrapped in complications. The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Amara wanted to deny it, to insist that her decision was based on logic and self-preservation, not fear. But Jessica wasn't finished. You want to know what's really happening? His family cut him off completely. No trust fund, no financial support, no safety net. The gym is about to be foreclosed on because half his students left and the other half can't afford to keep training there. He's sleeping in his office because he can't afford rent anywhere else. Each revelation hit like a hammer blow. Amara had expected Xavier to land softly, cushioned by privilege and family connections. The reality, that he'd chosen her over everything that had defined his life, was almost impossible to process. Why are you telling me this? Because I've worked for that man for 2 years, and I've never seen him fight for anything that mattered. He fought for trophies, for rankings, for reputation. All bullshit that feeds the ego but starves the soul. Jessica's voice was fierce now, protective. But he's fighting for you like his life depends on it. And maybe it does. It doesn't matter. His family was right. We're from different worlds. What happened at the cabin was it was fantasy. It wasn't real. Wasn't it? Jessica moved closer, her eyes blazing with frustration. Because the way he talks about those 3 days, the way his whole face changes when he says your name, that seems pretty damn real to me. Amara closed her eyes, trying to block out the hope that was building in her chest despite every logical reason to suppress it. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. Hope made you believe in things that couldn't last. Even if it was real, it doesn't change anything. I can't be with someone whose family sees me as a threat to be managed. I won't spend my life being the embarrassment he has to defend. You're right, Jessica said quietly. You can't be with that person. But Xavier isn't that person anymore. The question is, are you brave enough to be with the person he's become? Meanwhile, across the city in a gym that felt more like a mausoleum, Xavier was destroying a heavy bag with methodical precision. Each punch carried the weight of 18 hours without sleep, without food, without any plan beyond the desperate hope that if he could just find Amara, he could somehow fix what his family had destroyed. The gym was empty now, not just of students but of hope. The foreclosure notice taped to the front door was a countdown timer on everything he'd thought mattered. In 72 hours, this place would belong to the bank, and he'd officially become the cautionary tale his father had always predicted he'd be. But none of that mattered compared to the look in Amara's eyes when she'd walked away. The death of trust. The return of walls he'd watched her slowly lower. The transformation back into someone who expected to be hurt by people who claimed to care about her. His phone rang for the 100th time. Another reporter, probably, or maybe his mother calling to gloat about being proven right. He'd stopped answering hours ago, stopped caring about damage control or reputation management. There was only one voice he wanted to hear, and that voice had made it clear she never wanted to speak to him again. You look like hell. Xavier turned to find Master Chun standing in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Gym's closed, Xavier said, returning to his assault on the heavy bag. Is it? Because the sign on the door says it belongs to you for another 3 days. Then I guess I have 3 days to figure out what comes next. Master Chun approached slowly, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. What comes next is you stop destroying equipment and start making decisions. I made my decision. I chose her over everything else, and she walked away anyway. Did she? Or did she run away from something she was afraid to believe in? Xavier's hands stilled on the bag. What's the difference? The difference is that walking away is a choice made from strength. Running away is a choice made from fear. Master Chun settled onto a nearby bench, his movements deliberate. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She told me to stay away. She said I was exactly like my family, That I was fooling myself if I thought I could be anything else. And are you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Xavier looked around the empty gym, his kingdom, his identity, his proof of worth, and realized that none of it meant anything without someone to share it with. I don't know, he admitted. 3 days with her, and I felt more like myself than I had in my entire life. But maybe she's right. Maybe that was just another performance, another way of trying to be what someone else needed me to be. Or maybe, Master Chen said quietly, it was the first time you allowed yourself to be who you actually are instead of who you thought you had to be. Xavier felt something shift in his chest, not breaking, but realigning. For 28 years, he defined himself by external measures, wins and losses, family approval, social status. But those 3 days with Amara had shown him something different. What it felt like to be valued for kindness instead of achievement, to be seen for potential instead of performance. What if she won't listen? Then you'll have learned something about yourself that you didn't know before. But Xavier, Master Chen stood, placing a hand on his student's shoulder. Some things are worth fighting for even if you're not guaranteed to win. Especially if you're not guaranteed to win. As if summoned by their conversation, Xavier's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. She's at the Marriott downtown. Room 412. You have maybe 30 minutes before she disappears forever. Don't waste them. Xavier stared at the message, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of his life. He could play it safe, let Amara disappear, rebuild his old life with whatever pieces remained. Or he could risk everything on the chance that love was worth more than safety, was already reaching for his keys before he'd consciously made the decision. Some fights were worth losing everything for. And some people were worth becoming better. 4.20 minutes later, Xavier stood outside room 412, his hand raised to knock, paralyzed by the knowledge that whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether he spent the rest of his life regretting what he'd lost or celebrating what he'd found. Inside the room, Amara sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her own reflection in the dark window, trying to summon the courage to either open the door to possibility or close it forever. Neither of them realized that on the other side of that door waited the answer to the question they'd both been asking. Was love strong enough to bridge the gap between who they'd been and who they could become together? There was only one way to find out. Xavier knocked. The knock came soft but certain, like a heartbeat against the hotel room door. Amara knew who it was before she opened it, had felt him coming like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and electric. Xavier stood in the hallway, and she barely recognized him. Gone were the designer clothes and polished perfection. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. He looked broken and real and more beautiful than she'd ever seen him. Before you say anything, he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and desperation, I need you to know something. I need you to know that everything my family said, everything they did, that's not who I am anymore. Amara gripped the door frame, fighting every instinct that told her to slam the door and protect what was left of her heart. Xavier, please. Just, please let me say this. His eyes held the kind of raw vulnerability that comes from having nothing left to lose. I spent 28 years being exactly what they wanted me to be. Rich, successful, empty. I thought that was strength, but it was just fear wearing expensive clothes. She wanted to interrupt, to stop him before he said something that would make it impossible to walk away again. But something in his face kept her silent. 3 days ago, you asked me what I was fighting for, and I didn't have an answer. Today I do. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the tears gathering in his eyes. I'm fighting for the chance to be the man you saw in me. I'm fighting for the right to love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely, honestly, without reservation. This is crazy, Amara whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is. It's completely insane. Xavier's laugh was shaky, desperate. I gave up everything, my family, my money, my reputation, for the chance to stand here and tell you that you are worth more than all of it combined. You don't understand what you're saying. Your family, your life. My family is a collection of people who mistake cruelty for strength and money for worth. My life was a performance I was tired of giving. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her face. But with you for 3 perfect days, I wasn't performing. I was just me. Amara felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. What if just you isn't enough? What if we're too different, too damaged too? What if we're not? Xavier's voice was barely above a whisper. What if we're exactly what each other needs? What if love isn't about being perfect, it's about being perfect together? Before she could respond, he pulled out his phone and showed her the screen, a video call from someone she didn't recognize. There's someone I want you to meet, he said, his voice gentle. Someone who helped me understand what I was really fighting for. The face that appeared on the screen was weathered and kind, with eyes that held the weight of someone who'd seen too much loss and chosen love anyway. Ms. Washington, the man said, his voice carrying a slight accent. I am Roberto Santos. I believe you knew my gym in Detroit. Amara's breath caught. Roberto, the man who'd taught her to fight, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd been like a father to the scared girl she'd been. Roberto? How did you, your young man called me, Roberto said, his smile warming his weathered features. He wanted to understand who you really are. What you've survived. What you've overcome. Xavier was watching her face, seeing the tears she was trying to hold back. He told me about the 12-year-old girl who refused to cry when bigger kids beat her up. About the teenager who used her fists to protect kids who couldn't protect themselves. About the woman who fought 41 times and never lost because she was fighting for something bigger than herself. He also told me, Roberto continued, about the mother who gave up everything she was to give her daughter everything she needed. About the woman who's been carrying guilt that was never hers to carry. Amara was openly crying now, the wall she'd built to protect herself crumbling under the weight of being truly seen. Mija, Roberto's voice was infinitely gentle, Sophie's death was not your fault. You were not a bad mother for providing the only way you knew how. You were a lioness protecting her cub, and sometimes lionesses have to hunt to keep their babies fed. The words hit like absolution, like forgiveness she'd never thought she deserved. Amara sank against the door frame, 28 years of pain finally finding release. And you, Roberto turned his attention to Xavier. You called me because you wanted to understand her. That tells me everything I need to know about your heart. Xavier ended the call and pocketed his phone, his attention focused entirely on Amara. I don't care if we're from different worlds. I don't care if it's complicated or difficult or if people don't understand. I care about you. I care about us. I care about the way you make me want to be better instead of just wanting to prove I'm the best. Xavier, I love you, he said simply, the words hanging between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love the way you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I love that you're brave enough to show me my flaws and patient enough to help me become someone worthy of your love. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant instructor who dismissed her, not the privileged rich boy who'd mocked her, but the man who'd chosen her over everything that had previously defined his worth. I love you too, she whispered, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. Xavier's face transformed, years of loneliness and emptiness giving way to something that looked like sunrise. Yeah. I love that you're brave enough to let me teach you. I love that you chose me over safety. I love that you see me as more than just my damage. They came together then, not with the desperate hunger of people afraid they might lose each other, but with the deep certainty of people who'd finally found home. The kiss tasted like tears and possibility, like the end of running and the beginning of building something real. When they finally broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. So what happens now? Amara asked. Now we figure it out together. The gym, the future, what we want to build instead of what we're running from. The gym is about to be foreclosed on. Then we'll find a new one. Start over. Build something that belongs to us instead of my family's expectations. Amara smiled, feeling lighter than she had since Sophie died. You want to start a gym with a woman whose reputation is built on underground fighting? I want to start a gym with a woman whose reputation is built on never giving up, no matter how many times life knocked her down. Xavier's smile was radiant. Besides, I have a feeling we're going to teach some very different lessons than the ones I was teaching before. Such as, that real strength isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you're willing to protect. That fighting isn't about domination, it's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. He kissed her softly. That love isn't a weakness to be hidden, it's a power to be shared. 3 months later, Phoenix Martial Arts Academy opened its doors in a converted warehouse in East Denver. The name was Amara's idea, rising from ashes, beginning again, transformation through fire. The classes were different from anything either of them had taught before. Yes, there was technique and conditioning and competition training. But there was also something deeper, lessons about fighting for purpose instead of pride, about protecting instead of dominating, about finding strength in vulnerability. The students were different too. Former gang members learning to channel anger into protection. Domestic violence survivors discovering their own power. Kids from rough neighborhoods finding mentors who understood what it meant to fight for survival and choosing to fight for something better instead. CTA 3. What's the most important lesson someone has taught you about real strength? Share your stories about mentors, teachers, or experiences that showed you what it really means to be strong. Your story might inspire someone else. Xavier had kept his promise. He'd learned to fight like Amara fought, with purpose and protection as his guide. His technique was still flawless, but now it served something greater than his ego. And Amara had discovered something she'd never expected, that teaching others to fight could be a form of healing, that sharing her strength could multiply it instead of diminishing it. They were in the gym late one evening, Amara working with a group of teenage girls while Xavier coached a class of young men who'd aged out of the foster system. The space hummed with the kind of energy that comes from people discovering they're stronger than they knew. "Hey," Xavier said, approaching her after his class had left. "You got a minute?" "Always. What's up?" Instead of answering, he pulled out his phone and showed her the screen, a news article with their picture and the headline, "Former underground fighter and disgraced champion builds something beautiful from the ashes." "We made the news again," he said, grinning. "Good news this time. Read it." The article was different from the sensationalized coverage they'd endured months earlier. This was a story about redemption, about two broken people who'd found healing in each other and chosen to share that healing with their community. "Listen to this part," Xavier said, scrolling to a quote from one of their students. "Before I came here, I thought fighting was about proving you were tougher than everyone else. Now I know it's about proving you're brave enough to protect people who need protecting." Xavier and Amara don't just teach martial arts, they teach you how to be the person you were meant to be. Amara felt tears prick her eyes. "That's beautiful. There's more." Xavier's voice was soft, nervous. "There's something I need to ask you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, dropping to one knee right there on the mat where they'd rebuilt their lives. "Amara Washington, you taught me the difference between being strong and being brave. You showed me what it means to fight for love instead of fighting for glory. You made me want to be worthy of the faith you had in me." Amara's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I know we've only been together 9 months. I know it's crazy and fast and probably terrifying. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you, growing with you, building something beautiful with you." He opened the box to reveal a simple diamond ring, not ostentatious or designed to impress, but perfect in its honesty. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and protect you and stand beside you for whatever comes next?" Through her tears, Amara could see their students gathering at the edges of the mat, phones out, capturing this moment that felt like the culmination of everything they'd survived and overcome. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms as their students erupted in cheers. They kissed surrounded by the family they'd built from scratch, in a gym that belonged to them, in the life they'd chosen to create together. When they finally broke apart, Amara looked into Xavier's eyes and saw their future reflected there, not perfect, not without challenges, but real and honest and built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Both of you." Both of us. Xavier's smile was radiant as he placed his hand on her still flat stomach. Roberto called this morning. He said Sophie would be proud of the woman her mother became, and excited to have a little brother or sister to watch over. Amara's tears turned to laughter, bright, joyful, full of the kind of hope she'd thought she'd lost forever. You told Roberto before you told me? I needed to ask for permission. From both of them, Roberto and Sophie. They're the ones who made you who you are. As their students continued celebrating around them, Amara and Xavier held each other in the center of the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate destructions. Outside, Denver sparkled in the evening light, full of people who needed what they had learned to offer. Inside, two fighters who'd found something worth protecting held each other and planned a future that honored both their pasts and their endless possibilities. Love had won. Not because it was easy, but because they'd chosen to fight for it when it would have been easier to walk away. Not because they were perfect, but because they were perfect for each other. And somewhere in the mountain cabin, where it all began, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise that some stories end exactly where they're supposed to, with two people who'd learned that the strongest thing you can ever do is let yourself be loved. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next. Click on the image or video showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.